I think, you mentioned skeletal muscle, and oftentimes I hear people say that they will eat fruit post-training or fruit pre-training, and skeletal muscle doesn't utilize fructose. And I think that that's somewhat important to highlight that you're
Yeah,
really
yeah,
looking for.
yeah, exactly. I think so because the fructose very rich systemic blood, so it's catabolized first by intestine, and then only like some portion reach the liver, and the liver basically suck up almost 100% of fructose because of this really high enzyme expression. And then
Mm.
so almost 0% of fructose actually reach the systemic blood, so it doesn't really reach the other organ like brain or skeletal muscle.
Thank you to Bite for sponsoring this episode of the show. I absolutely love Bite products. Their toothpaste is made with clean ingredients. It's a quote bite. It's a toothpaste tablet. You pop it into your mouth, you chew it up, you start brushing. It will turn into a paste like you are using a normal standard toothpaste without all the mess. Also, regular commercial toothpaste often have harsh chemicals, artificial flavors, things that potentially can affect your oral microbiome, which, by the way, we are going to continue to learn more about. Bite makes plastic free alternatives for everything on your bathroom sink, whether it's toothpaste, whether it's mouthwash, and quite frankly, their deodorant. I use their Neroli. It's absolutely incredible. Bite is offering my listeners graciously 20% off your first order. Go to trybite.com/Dr. Lyon. That's TRYBITE.com/Dr. Lyon for 20% off your first order. These make great gifts. They are beautiful and sleekly designed. Dr. Jang, thank you so much, Dr. Cholsoon Jang. I'm so grateful to have you on the show. You are extraordinary, and a shout out to Dr. Alexis Cowan, who made the introduction. You received your PhD from Harvard. You did a postdoc at Princeton, and you are now. Are you at University of?
California, Irvine.
Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. And you are working as an assistant professor. You've done some extraordinary research. I still remember when you had a cell paper that came out, and it is the small intestine converts dietary fructose into glucose and organic acids. That was like this big legendary paper, which I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your research, how you got interested in
Mhm.
the gut microbiota, and of course, your research in fructose.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So to answer your question about how I got into this fructose field, um, it was actually funny story. So I was interested in nutrients for a long time, and then I joined my postdoctoral fellowship lab in Josh Lavirovich's lab at Princeton University, and I was trying to figure out what I want to study. And I talked to Josh for several times, and Josh one day came from some conference and he said, "Hey, we gotta study fructose because this is so popular everywhere, but we I don't think we really understand well. And we have very good techniques to study this kind of nutrition, how they are processed in the body, how different organs and microbiome cooperatively, digest fructose and where they go, why fructose is connected to different disease." So that was fascinating conversation with him, and then so I just sat down, and then just figure out, what's known and what's unknown in the literature. And yeah, there are so many things known and unknown, and so something are controversial. So I wanted to study that at the time.
And this idea of fructose, so for the listener, if you could explain what fructose is, the difference between high fructose corn syrup and, say, the way in which we in the nutrition field would think about fructose from fruit. And
Hmm.
I think that there's a lot of discussion about this, and perhaps even mention some of the controversies in this field.
Yeah. So, fructose is really similar to glucose. Everyone knows about glucose. And they actually have the same chemical formula. So, and only small difference in the chemical structure. The glucose is aldose sugar, and the fructose is ketose sugar. So that's only one difference in terms of chemistry. And fructose is abundant in fruits and vegetable, and nowadays everywhere, right? It's just all the processed food like Coke, sugary drink, and cake, chocolate, right? And because we love this sweet taste, right? It's really pleasant taste when you eat fructose. That's why now it's so abundant. Um, so historically, fructose was very expensive because you have to isolate from sugar cane or sugar beet, right? So it was really expensive. Only the rich people could eat fructose in the tea, such as, right, they isolate and then they put in the tea in the UK a long time ago. But then there's a revolution in the technology. The industrial revolution basically invented a method to generate fructose from glucose by using just one simple enzyme called glucose isomerase. So they can now generate tons of fructose from glucose, and mostly they use corn because corn is so easy to get. So they just basically incubate corn syrup with this enzyme to convert glucose to fructose. And then now they can get this high fructose corn syrup, which is composed of about 1-to-1 ratio of glucose and fructose.
Hmm. That's so interesting. And from what I understand, the goal of your lab is to understand how nutrient metabolism across organs and gut microbiome can go awry, potentially cause disease. You guys have focused a lot on diseases linked to nutrients such as fructose,
Mhm.
alcohol,
Mhm.
fiber, fat content, in the scope of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and what they used to call NASH. I think they call it now a metabolic
Right,
something else.
right.
Do you know what do they call it now?
Oh, it's
Used
confusing, right? Metabolic dysfunction associated fatty liver. So it's MAFLD, MAFLD.
NAFLD. I mean, they just wanted to make it more
Right,
complicated.
exactly.
We have now graduated from NAFLD and NASH to something else. And can you talk a little bit about your research now and what some of the high level understandings are of fructose? Is it really a problem? At what dose is it a problem?
Mm,
I know in some of the rodent models, they're fed 40% of their carbohydrates
mhm.
are
Yes.
fructose. But
Mhm.
what about humans? Humans will say, well, now they're saying, is fruit bad for me? And versus say a processed food that has again, high fructose corn syrup. How is it different? What is the dosing?
Mhm.
What is some of the research that you guys are doing as it translates to the general population?
Yeah. So our lab is now mostly interested in basically how fructose, like as you ask, like what dose of fructose is toxic, while why there's a difference between this solid form of fructose versus liquid form of fructose. So people think, fruit is good because, it has fructose, but it has also like other nutrients, right? Vitamins and fiber, which we think is true. Um, but nowadays, actually, the fruit is getting more and more sweeter because we like, sweet fruit, and then so basically they are selected, and that's why even some people, lean people who consume a lot of fruits, they actually also get fatty liver because they think only the fruit is very healthy and they consume a lot, and that can cause actually fatty liver, and they are surprised when they visit the hospital. Oh, why I always just eat fruit and why I get the fatty liver? Um, so the dose is actually really hard to understand because it is so hard to measure how much we eat fructose because I mean you can check the label in the Coke or other food, but how I don't remember actually how much I eat this morning, for example, right? And all this data is based on this questionnaire, from the people, and it's really hard to measure.
I'd like to take a moment and thank Thesis for sponsoring this episode of the show. I absolutely love Thesis. Thesis has been a game changer for me when I was doing my TEDx talk. I had very little time to prepare, and Thesis is the world's first customized nootropic company. What does this mean? Nootropics are nutrients found in nature or the human body that enhance cognitive function. Things like focus, energy, mood. And what I love about Thesis is I went to their website, I took a quiz, I got a box of various nootropics to try out. And what I found, especially lately, is I'm obsessed with their Clarity blend. This company makes incredible blends that I have not seen anywhere before. And it helped me with really being clear and focused. And depending on which formula you want to try, it helps with motivation and energy. I strongly suggest you head on over to their website, and that is takethesis.com/Dr. Lyon. And for listeners of my podcast, Thesis is offering 10% off your first box. That's takethesis.com/Dr. Lyon.
There are some actually human studies. People try to understand, right? They give different doses of fructose to the people, and they try to understand, what those causes. But the another issue is that we have different capacity of clear fructose. So some people is really good at clear fructose from the intestine and the liver. So fructose doesn't really, make a big problem. But some other people have problem in digestion, and some fructose actually, cause this damage in the liver, or even spill over to the colony microbiome that causes microbiome dysbiosis, which can cause also inflammation and so on. So it's hard to say this dose is good for everyone, or it really depends on the people. So yeah, my lab basically studied this using the different mouse model, and then we generate different, genetic mouse model, or feeding fructose in the drinking water or fructose in the chow. As you mentioned, the mouse study has been, using this really high fructose in the chow, 40%. So the reason why is that because the mouse metabolism is 10 times faster than humans. So to induce some disease, you need to give a lot of fructose to mice. But probably it's not true for the human. Nowadays, the statistics say about 20% of carbohydrate intake is from fructose, at least in the United States and some the South American country. But maybe it's much less in Asia or Europe. So that's another difference.
That's interesting. 20%, so if we were to think about that, 20% of the carbohydrate is in the form of fructose.
Mm-hmm.
And probably the majority of that is not in the form of fruit bound with fiber.
Mm-hmm.
We could, just because of the overall fruit consumption. Is fruit the only place that we find fructose in nature?
Fruit and vegetable and honey.
And honey.
Yeah.
How would somebody know that their fructose tolerance?
Yeah. So if you have, when you have fructose intolerance, which means you cannot really absorb fructose by the intestine, then actually fructose goes to the large intestine. And because of osmotic pressure, the water comes into the intestine when there's a lot of fructose in the colon. Then you really feel bad. You have a gut problem. You know what I mean? So
Nobody wants to sit next to you guys. That's why.
right. So
That's exactly what happens.
right. That's like
Bye, Felicia.
yeah, exactly. It's similar to lactose intolerance in that regard. You have uncomfortable feeling, so they cut down fructose eating. But compared to the lactose intolerance, fructose intolerance is much rare in population.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. And you had mentioned in this paper, which I strongly recommend everybody. We'll actually link it in, and we'll do a small summary. The small intestine converts dietary fructose into glucose and organic acids. This came out in Cell Metabolism in 2018, and it really was a popular paper. What was something that you really brought to light on this paper
Yeah,
that you felt that was not addressed or known in the past?
yeah. So that was my first paper when I studied fructose, and it was interesting finding because before that paper, in the textbook, everybody says fructose is catabolized only by the liver based on gene expression. So there is a gene called ketohexokinase, which is really essential enzyme for fructose catabolism. If you don't have that enzyme, you are basically you eat fructose and all the fructose goes to the urine because no organ touch the fructose because you don't have this enzyme. That's shown um, by the knockout mouse model and also by the Pfizer drug. The Pfizer actually invented some money to generate this ketohexokinase inhibitor just to
Oh, that's interesting.
yeah, because they hope they can give this drug to the people, and then people take this drug, and then
Hmm.
this enzyme is suppressed. Then even though you eat chocolate or soda, it can just go
Ah,
to the urine because you cannot do anything.
wow. And would it potentially affect NASH, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease?
Right. That's how they. Yeah.
Wow. It never did it ever come to market?
I remember it was in clinical trial phase 2 or maybe even 3, but I don't remember now actually what's going on now.
Wow.
Yeah.
So instead of just cleaning up our diet, they are providing a medication to limit the uh, absorption of fructose.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. The catabolism of fructose. Right.
okay.
So the paper that you mentioned was basically about the finding where we say, fructose is digested by the intestine first, even before fructose reach the liver. So if you think about the enzyme, this ketohexokinase, it is known to be expressed in the intestine and the liver, but the liver level is much, much higher compared to the intestine. And there are some expression in the kidney. But if you think about it, right, then based on these enzyme levels, people think, okay, it's liver that catabolizes all this fructose. But if you think about what organ first see the fructose when you eat, it's actually intestine. It's the first organ. So it doesn't matter liver express so much high level. If intestine express that certain level of enzyme, and then clear this fructose before the liver. So you have to remember this order of the organs which are exposed to these dietary nutrients. And then the reason why it's interesting is because intestine we think is like a passive organ. They just don't do anything. They just take up the nutrients and then deliver to the other organs. But then now we show that the intestine is actually active, metabolically active organ in terms of fructose. They catabolize fructose and then convert fructose to glucose and other metabolite. It's different from glucose because intestine doesn't really catabolize glucose. They just take up, or amino acid they just take up and then deliver to the other organs.
Wow. It's really interesting. Do you think that that would give us some kind of indication as to the amount of glucose, fructose, and amino acids that we are designed to eat? And I say designed loosely, but from a percentage of calories. Again, with rodent models, we can define certain things. We can say this percentage will come from, fructose, this will come from glucose. Do you think that there potentially is an ideal, and I realize it's hard to say, but is there potentially an ideal percentage of with someone who has a normal functioning intestine, would it be feasible to say that 10% or 5% of our carbohydrates should come from fructose? Do you think that there's a way in which we could design a diet based on some of these mechanisms that we're seeing?
Yeah, I mean that's $1 million question. To
You
be,
mean you don't know the answer?
I don't know
Harvard,
the answer.
Princeton,
I
come
don't know.
on.
I mean, to be honest, I think this fructose. I mean, to be honest, we can survive without eating any fructose because, right, glucose is sufficient to, you know, to provide energy and other things. And the reason why the humans we are exposed to this fructose for a long time is because in the Asian society, we don't really we were not agriculture people. We basically harvested fruits, right, and vegetables, and then we just ate them. And then it's good actually evolutionarily because fructose is different from glucose in that it's catabolized, but it's also really highly stored as a fat, especially in the liver. And so that's why, when you eat fruit in the fall, then you can store these carbons as fat, and then you can survive in the winter, right?
Mm.
Glucose you can also generate glycogen and then store in the liver and muscle, but the fructose is more converted to the fat because, as I said, the liver is the organ that really um, likes fructose and then converts fructose to other metabolites. So yeah, I mean that's quite interesting if you think about how this glucose versus fructose is different.
And I think, you mentioned skeletal muscle. And oftentimes I hear people say that they will eat fruit post training or fruit pre training, and skeletal muscle doesn't utilize fructose. And I think that that's somewhat important to highlight that you're
Yeah,
really
yeah,
looking for.
yeah, exactly. I think so because the fructose barely reach systemic blood, so it's catabolized first by intestine, and then only like some portion reach the liver, and the liver basically suck up almost 100% of fructose because of this really high enzyme expression. And then
Mm.
so almost 0% of fructose actually reach the systemic blood, so it doesn't really reach the other organ like brain or skeletal muscle.
Isn't that interesting that this fuel, that fructose seems to be, would you say it's a fuel source for the intestine? Is it? I mean, that and potentially, again, I don't know exactly what it's doing in the liver other than being stored.
So that's an interesting question. So we haven't measured how much fructose is used by intestine for energy production.
Mm,
Um, but based on our calculation, we think intestine really doesn't use fructose as a energy source. They just basically break down and then convert fructose to other metabolite. And the liver is the organ that take up this fructose and then store as a fat, convert as a fat and to the fat, and then deliver to other organs such as adipose tissue. But when they have too much fat stored in the liver, then that causes fatty liver.
Thank you to Element for sponsoring this episode of the show. I have found a new reason to take Element. I don't know if any of you cold plunge, but if you do, how many of you get out of the cold plunge and I swear to you cramp up? Well, I am one of those people and I doubled up my Element. I no longer am getting out of the cold plunge and totally having calf cramps. So thank you, Element. I am so grateful. If you are somebody who exercises a lot, who sweats a lot, Element, which is an electrolyte solution, comes in a little pack. You throw it in some water. Sometimes we throw it in iced tea. If we're getting really creative, we might throw it in sparkling water. It has 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, 60 milligrams of magnesium. It helps you stay hydrated. It tastes amazing. And right now, Element is offering my listeners a free sample packet with any purchase. That's 8 single serving packets free with any Element order. This is a great way to start off your day. Head over to drinklmnt.com/Dr. Lyon. That's drinkelement.com/Dr. Lyon. Really, again, it's really interesting. We think you'd mentioned this earlier that as we're eating fruit, we think fruit is healthy. And again, is it probably healthy and to what level, yes, but there are the foods are modified to become sweeter. We are not eating, if you think about it, if you go and you eat a blueberry off of a bush that you just found in nature, and I'm not saying that one should do this, but it's pretty bitter.
Yeah.
Does not taste sweet at all
Yeah.
versus the foods that we are eating here and now. There's this quote that all disease begins in the gut.
I like that a lot.
Would you agree with that statement?
I mean, it's an overstatement for sure, but it's really, it means a lot to me. I mean, that's how, I guess, right? I mean, we are exposed to everything, but especially the food is what we basically take up, and then it goes into our body, right? So I trust that it's true.
Well, Hippocrates
Right.
said that.
Exactly.
So, I don't know, pretty smart guy.
Yeah.
And, I think that much of your research has validated this theory,
Right.
that much of disease begins in the gut. And when you think about it, it really is influenced by the things that we are putting in. What factors might individuals consider as it relates to fructose consumption? Again, we mentioned that there wasn't a particular dose, but sometimes people will say, should you consume liquid calories? What are your thoughts in that?
Yeah. So, as far as I can tell, if you want to consume some fructose, I think the solid form is much better than liquid form, because there are two reasons. One is pretty strong epidemiological evidence. So people study, again, based on questionnaire, how solid fructose do you consume per week, or liquid form, and then they see actually there's a pretty good correlation between the liquid form of fructose consumption and a lot of different metabolic disorders. But solid form doesn't really show that correlation. So people think, oh, maybe the soda is the bad one compared to chocolate or cake. And that's pretty consistent with our result, because when we feed mice this drinking water, fructose in the drinking water versus solid form of fructose, the drinking water is much worse, because again, the intestine should have some time to catabolize fructose and block the fructose spillover to the liver. And if you drink soda, then the absorption is too quick. Though it's liquid, right? So you basically take 100 molecule, and then you can process only like 10 molecule per time. Then 90 molecule just bypass the intestine and it goes to the liver, and the liver suck up this 90 and then generate a lot of fat. But if you eat chocolate or cake and then it's slow, like also fruit has fiber, so you have to chew, right? You cannot just drink orange, and then the intestine has sufficient time and capacity to digest fructose, so that the liver doesn't really see much fructose. So we think, I told this to my mom, because my mom really likes fruits, and I just told her, don't just grind fruits, because you're a VG, so
But no smoothies, right? No, so smoothies potentially take away that mastication, and it doesn't allow for slower absorption. So you were probably thinking, as you started to do this research, wow, smoothies were the worst invention,
right?
if it cloaked in quote health, aside from junk food.
Yeah, I think it's actually a bad idea to just grind the whole fruit and drink them, because you want to chew it instead of drinking.
Here is a question I'm curious about. If you were to say someone should have, okay, and I realize that we're just speaking hypotheticals, would you rather have someone have a glucose drink, say a Gatorade, or a fruit smoothie?
Glucose drinking, that's interesting. We barely drink, we drink glucose, but usually we eat glucose, right?
Right.
I guess the big difference between glucose and fructose, again, is the intestine actually can, take up glucose quite well. And then glucose actually doesn't really accumulate in the liver. Liver doesn't take up glucose much. So unless there's so much high glucose in the blood. So that's different. So liver, yeah, glucose goes to the muscle and other organs, adipose tissue,
Yes.
brain. So it's maybe less toxic.
I would agree with you. Again, we're just talking as friends here, trying to think about, people will always say either or, and potentially just, thinking about these things. One of the things that I would love for you to speak to is this idea of your research gives credence to the body as this holistic type of system.
Mhm.
And I certainly would love your perspective on the holistic nature and the inter-organ crosstalk between systems.
Yeah, so that's another topic in my lab is interesting because when I first studied this fructose, I realized, wow, people study only liver, and then now there's a crosstalk between intestine, liver, and gut microbiome. So I realized, okay, we should study every organ at the same time, not just focus on one organ because they are always connected through the blood system. They constantly take up and then release different factors such as protein, nutrient, and metabolite, and then signaling molecules. So that's why whenever we do our animal works, we try to harvest as many as organ possible, and then look at them, what changes, and sometimes there are surprising change in different organs. You completely unexpected. Like sometimes spleen shows up something, right? Sometimes brain shows something. So that's why we are fascinated about this concept about the interorgan communication.
Anything particularly, my community is always interested in skeletal muscle.
Hmm. Oh, muscle. Yeah, muscle is big organ, right? It's just in terms of whole body, muscle is one of
Mhm.
the biggest organ, right? Maybe next after maybe and then skin probably. But muscle. I mean, a lot of studies done in muscle, so people know quite well, I guess. And when we study fructose, we usually don't really look at muscle except when we expose animals to a chronic fructose because that causes insulin resistance in
In
muscle.
skeletal muscle
Yeah,
or that's it. And is that because of the fatty acid byproducts that are deposited in skeletal muscle, or whether it's a ceramide or diacylglycerol
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
triglyceride?
Lipotoxicity. Yeah, that happens in the muscle too, in the liver.
And that's from fructose
That's a good
or
question.
potentially? Mm.
Um, yeah, some are, but not all, because initially fructose causes this insulin resistance in the liver, and then now the glucose or other carbohydrate also accumulate in the systemic blood. Then muscle take up more, and then I think that's how it causes the systemic effect. I wouldn't say fructose alone contribute to this.
Really, really interesting. Um, Anything that you found quite striking with this inter-organ crosstalk, whether it was with the spleen or the intestine,
Mhm.
as it relates to fructose or anything? I mean, your lab is extremely comprehensive. You even have a recent paper on It's let's see, it's a cold water. I got it right here. Quantitative analysis of metabolic fluxes in brown fat and skeletal muscle during thermogenesis. I
Right.
mean, your lab is quite comprehensive from a metabolomic perspective.
Right. So that paper is collaboration with David Gorton and UMass. He's a really famous guy in the field of brown fat thermogenesis. Um, yeah, we have some special technique called arterial venous metabolomics. Basically, we try to measure what's going into the organ, what's coming out of the organ. So we took the blood sample from the arterial blood and the venous blood and then compare so that you basically compare input and output of the organ instead of just measuring level in the blood,
Right.
right? So if you compare input and output, and we can tell what organs take up and release. So we apply that technique to the mice, and especially in the cold exposure condition, because the cold exposure, as you know, induces this thermogenesis in especially in the brown adipose tissue in the human body we have here around shoulder, and that's highly popular in that it can suppress this this. It can prevent this metabolic disorder like diabetes, obesity, and so on, because you burn heat, right? You burn energy to generate heat. So we
Right.
try to understand whether brown fat or even muscle, because muscle is also important when you shiver, right? When you're cold, shiver, and then that generate heat in the muscle. So we try to understand what's going on there.
And what did you, I mean,
What
did you
did I
find? I mean,
find?
there's very interesting. There were several mechanisms, several specific mechanisms that were identified in the study. It looked at fat utilization, divergent fuel utilization profiles, which I thought was interesting, such as cold exposure versus pharmacological agents.
Mm-hmm.
Very well done study. We'll link it. We'll do a summary for everybody. Quite fascinating, and also the amino acid composition of brown adipose tissue, and that it had this increased consumption of amino acids during the thermogenesis, except for glutamine, which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, we still don't know why brown fat doesn't really use glutamine. Instead, they release glutamine. Maybe they try to get rid of this nitrogen, because when you break down other amino acid, you can accumulate nitrogen. So, and glutamine is one of the best way to get rid of the nitrogen. So that's maybe one way for brown fat to remove. And yeah, in that paper, we basically quantitate how much glucose and lactate or other amino acid, fatty acid can be burned by brown fat or muscle. Because before that, people just think they use glucose, they use lactate, but we don't know what percentage or how much they use.
And that, do you think that that will provide translational information to humans as they begin to think about, obviously calories are important. And I think a lot of your work is really from the perspective of how do we make the world healthier. I
Mhm.
mean, a lot of your research um, translates to, and your lab translates to this. Do you think that once we have an understanding of how much is utilized in particular environments, whether it's cold, etc., we'll be able to combat some of these diseases that we're seeing?
Yeah, I think certainly, hopefully in the next decade, some people study more about this kind of biology in humans, because obviously this is a mouse study and there's a gap between mouse and humans. But we think a lot of this interesting biology is similar between mice and humans. So hopefully this intrigue people like clinician and other people who can recruit patients and then study this, and then they maybe that's our dream basically. They can show this gonna work in humans too, and so that's gonna be translational.
Yeah, so fascinating. The something else that you published recently, actually 2023, and this was liver and muscle circadian clocks cooperate to support glucose tolerance in mice. And people talk a lot about circadian rhythm, circadian clocks, and that they're a defining feature. But this is interesting. This idea of specifically liver and muscle circadian clocks.
Yeah, so that is also collaboration with um, Paulo's previous lab members. Paulo was one of the biggest figure in this field, the circadian rhythm. He unfortunately passed away 3 years
Mm.
ago, right after I arrived here. Um, but then, yeah, they basically made a lot of different genetic mouse models that they disrupt circadian rhythm in specific organs. And then they also restore some circadian organ, like, for example, they disrupt the whole body circadian and then restore circadian only in the liver, only in the muscle, and see what's
Mm.
happening. And that was fascinating study. And then we found very interesting, like different metabolic changes across the organs when you have only liver circadian rhythm intact versus muscle. And we think also the main message was from that paper was the diet is one of the most important factor that can you know normalize our circadian rhythm, even though you have some disruption in certain organ circadian rhythm.
Yeah. So can you speak to a little bit about that? I mean, again, these are rodent models and rodents are nocturnal. They will certainly continue to feed, an ad libitum fed
Mhm.
rodent would be considered an obese model. What can we learn or how can we think about that statement that food seems to be a very significant way in which we can entrain our circadian clock? And what does that impact have on our metabolomics, our metabolism of glucose, et cetera?
Yeah, right. The problem of mouse study in circadian rhythm, yeah, they are nocturnal, right? And then they just,
Yeah.
just eat all the time instead of 3 meals per day. So, I mean, so if you think about this, how circadian rhythm affect our metabolism, basically during circadian rhythm, our body is adapted to, sorry, I should say this way. Maybe during circadian rhythm, our body, at certain point, our body is very good at taking nutrients and then process them. But other times, maybe they just want to take a rest and then they don't want to, touch the food, right? So if we constantly eat, actually, nowadays the modern society, we are always exposed to readily available all these foods, so we just eat whenever. I have a lot in my desk too, and you can eat anytime, and that can cause problem because our body is basically not really working that way. We wanna have some certain time when we have to eat, and then certain time we have to break, right? So I guess that's the point that I want to make, right? For example, don't eat too much at night, because at night you are supposed to take a rest, right?
Interesting. Right. And what would you say? Would you say that there's a particular time frame in which humans should eat? Is it an 8 to 9 hour window? It's
Mm,
interesting. This paper looks at, somewhat obviously it's complex and it does have this misalignment between liver and muscle. I don't know how one could do that
mhm.
in humans, but do you think that there is a way in which we can entrain our circadian rhythm and should we be doing that in a structured, non-chaotic way?
Right, exactly. So I think you know we can certainly train our body, and that's why this intermittent fasting or right, those different diet can work in humans. So I guess maybe the timing is important, but we can control it. So for example, some people can eat only in certain time, and then they basically fix that time for a long time. Then the body basically get used to it, and then they are fine. But then if you just keep changing your dietary habit, you travel and then you eat sometimes at night, sometimes not, then that could be a problem because that disrupts your whole body system, and that's the bad one, I guess. Do you agree? I mean, it's
Yeah, I do agree.
yeah, yeah.
And I'm excited to see how we can begin to incorporate that more and potentially I absolutely agree with you that we should have structured feeding times. Probably some people will do earlier feeding windows versus later. I'm very interested in these muscle clock genes.
Hmm.
I don't know if we know much about them or their influence as it translates to something significant for humans.
Hmm.
But again, it seems as if that would be extraordinarily fascinating to look at. Do you have any thoughts of these muscle clocks, the regulation of glucose metabolism and these muscle clocks? Do you think that we're there yet? I know that there's this oscillation of these transporters. Thank you to Inside Tracker for sponsoring this episode of the show. I love Inside Tracker, and here's why. It allows you to choose your blood draw options. You can go to a blood draw in a lab. Inside Tracker lays out many different biomarkers, all of which are critical and comprehensive to your health and wellness, whether it is from ApoB to your liver enzymes, you name it, Inside Tracker has you covered. Head on over to insidetracker.com/Dr. Lyon. My listeners get 20% off the entire Inside Tracker store. That's insidetracker.com/Dr. Lyon. Once you get your data, you will know exactly how to forge ahead, whether it is changing your nutrition, changing your training, adjusting your sleep, etc. It will give you real data to make real change. Head on over to insidetracker.com/Dr. Lyon for 20% off the entire Inside Tracker store.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know much about that clot in the muscle specifically because again, we more focus on different organ communication. I mean, I don't know the answer.
But it'll be interesting
For sure. For
to
sure.
see as things really begin to evolve. And I realize that it's not studied directly, but do you think that exercise factors into these discussions of interorgan crosstalk and clock genes? Do you think that there is a role and a place for that? I know that out of Rabinowitz's lab, when you were there, they definitely focus on exercise, etc. Do you feel like that really plays a role
Yeah, for
now?
sure. Yeah, I mean, exercise is maybe the best way to treat all this disease, right? Metabolic disorder and so on, cardiovascular disease. And if you think about how that works, is exercise. I mean, I studied exercise during my PhD in Zoltar lab, and that was the basically exercise lab. What genes are turned on in the exercise, like PGCR alpha and fat acid oxidation genes, and so on. And then in Josh's lab, we basically tried to put the mouse in the wheel, the treadmill, and then try to figure out what nutrients are used by the exercise muscle and other organs. So I don't know how exercise changed the circadian rhythm of the muscle, but some people show already exercise in the morning versus at dinner
No,
time, right? I'm not sure whether it's really translational in humans, but probably, right? I mean, it also should be coordinated with the diet, whether you eat before and after exercise, right? Sometimes people eat a lot after exercise because they feel, right?
right.
right?
And maybe that's not the best thing, Who knows?
Yeah, who knows, right? Yeah. So fascinating topics.
It is. And just touching on this, there's a lot of, this cold therapy. And do you think that there are, again, it's difficult to say population interventions, but do you think that there is a place for some of these trends, these fitness trends that we see, whether it's heat therapy, but in particular this cold therapy that we saw in this rodent paper of brown adipose thermogenesis? Do you think that there's a role? And if so, what does that look like?
You mean the people who are exposed to cold
Yeah,
are
yeah.
more healthier?
I mean, or potentially, maybe have better metabolic regulation. Again, who knows? But I do think that this paper that you partnered with in this lab, I do think that that's very interesting. Um, I'm not sure if you've thought about that or if there was something on your mind regarding cold therapy, etc.
Yeah, I
And that
know.
might not be a fair question, but I'm just curious. And you could say no. We're not even looking at that.
Right.
Uh,
But I know I've seen these people who are actually doing this cold therapy in California and also in New York City. I mean, they say this is not FDA approved. This is not certified. But
yeah,
but still, I saw some people have actually pretty good benefit from that. So but I'm not sure it could be beneficial for everyone.
yeah.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that what are some of the studies that you're currently looking at in your lab and currently working on?
Right. So we have two topics. One is how dietary nutrients interact with each other, because usually we focus on only one each time, right? We study fructose, we study fat, but now we study how interaction happen between fructose and fiber. When you eat together, which one wins, right? If fructose is bad and the fiber is good, then which one wins? And when we adjust different ratio of these two,
Hmm.
and we also try to see whether the order matters. For example, when you feed fructose for a long time and then give fiber to that those mice, can we see the fiber reverse the fructose effect, or the opposite? When you feed fiber and then give fructose later, which one wins? Basically, maybe fiber is already makes your body quite well healthier, so then the fructose cannot really make bad effect. I mean, that's what we are trying to figure out. And then now we actually saw good news is that fiber wins. When you feed fiber and fructose together, when I say fiber, it's inulin. It's inulin fiber, which is a polymer of fructose. And the mice get inulin and fructose together, they're healthy. And if you give fructose for a long time and then induce fatty liver, and then
Mm.
give fiber plus fructose, so continuous fructose exposure, but then adding fiber on the diet actually reverse the fatty liver to the normal liver. So it's really fascinating.
How?
Yeah,
How?
yeah. I mean, it looks like the inulin somehow change the microbiome. It's totally microbiome dependent, because if you treat antibiotics, the effect is gone. Actually, even worse. So it looks like somehow microbiome changes happen by this fiber, and then they signal to the liver or intestine, and then they switch metabolism of the fructose so that they don't really accumulate fat anymore. It looks like what we see is fructose now is converted to amino acid instead of fat. So we try to find what molecules does this.
That is fascinating.
Yeah.
If you were to think about what wins, I really like how you had mentioned that. And some of your earlier research was on the gut microbiome. How important do you think that is on our body composition in general and our overall state of disease?
Right. I mean, gut microbiome is important in my opinion, because it's also a giant organ if you think about the number of cells or enzymes they have. So the mass is big, and also it's closely linked to diet for sure, right? And so far, I mean, some people are skeptical about microbiome because some people joke about, is there anything that are not related to microbiome these days? I was right, because everything is now related, and I think it's actually true, because it's one of our organs, to be honest, and
Yeah.
it's a big organ, and then it's so the effect of microbiome to many metabolic aspect of our body is certainly, I think, true.
Yeah, and unusual. I when we think about it from the perspective of how do we live longer? How do we live more healthy? How do we live disease free? Um, the influence on the gut microbiome, uh, obviously, from a medical perspective, we are new to.
Yeah.
Even the clinician who's been dealing with it for the last 10 years, I would still say it's a newer field.
Hmm.
Um, and so interesting, especially when you think about it as its own organ system.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, so many unknown about microbiome. We are really beginning to understand the microbiome.
So you're working on that in your lab.
Yeah, we maybe one third of our lab working on the microbiome, because obviously it's related to nutrients. It's so
Mm.
directly related.
What is one of the challenges in the that you see in research right now
You mean the microbiome?
related to your field? Well, related to your field, you had mentioned that people, when they are studying, for example, study individual. I'll just throw this out there: when individuals are looking at, I don't know, protein, they might just use a whey protein isolate versus
Mhm.
using a food that has its complete nutrient, quote, food matrix. And I'm curious from your perspective, as you're going in there trying to advance the science, what may be a few areas of struggle or I don't know, an area that needs improvement?
Right. I think the challenge here is that we need more active collaboration between scientists like me, biologists, and also nutrition scientists. So because I mean, I study nutrition, but I'm not the nutritionist. So it's important to communicate with them to make sure what we basically use for studying in mice is actually really translational in humans. Like you cannot just eat, for example, we can just give tons of fructose or only like specific fiber because it's so simplified version of our diet. So I think that's one thing we should for sure in the next decade, the active collaboration, maybe a big meeting that summon all these nutrition scientists and basic scientists to work together. I think
It
that's
would
the
be
big one.
incredible. So you do see there's a divergent.
Yeah,
I would agree with you because I mean it's so complex and it's such a new field. It's the newness to it is probably uh, again it's just a much newer science.
yeah.
So you mentioned that 1/3 of your lab is looking at the gut microbiome. What about the other 2/3?
Two-thirds is maybe what the another one-third is working on developing new technology, and another one-third is working on the organ interaction. So we use large animals too, like pigs. We have a pigs in our lab because pigs are really great in terms of they're similar to humans, much more than rodents do. And pigs are big, so we can take many different samples. As I mentioned, this blood sampling from different organ, venous blood is really possible in pigs, not really in mice. So that's what we do recently.
You're being very humble, and I know Dr. Alexis Cowan is going to listen to this episode. You mentioned that you're working on some techniques in your lab. And what you're not saying is that you're really working on techniques that could revolutionize the field, the work in metabolomics, non-radioactive stable isotope tracing, and bioinformatics analysis. So no need to be humble here. I would love to hear, and the listener would love to hear, because you are extraordinary. And I'm so grateful for your time. I don't take it lightly. And I know that the listener or the viewer will not take this lightly. You're doing really important work to advance the field. So thank you.
Thank you.
But please mention a little bit about these innovative techniques, what you are doing there. And I'd love to hear. And then I'm going to come back on the last 1/3.
Sure. So I guess another major challenge in our field is that we we think we know all the metabolites in our body, but it's for sure it's not true. I mean, people keep discovering new metabolites, especially made from gut microbiome and some other organs, especially in certain conditions, not just normal conditions. When they are stressed out, when they're exposed to cold, or when they're exposed to certain different disease states, the organs produce certain metabolite. That's why, I mean, because these metabolites exist only in certain conditions, that's why we don't really see them usually. So our lab basically tried to develop techniques to identify those metabolites, what they are, and then whether they have any functions in the body, why they have to be generated in the body, right? So
Mm.
that's what we do these days. I mean, some people argue also that we already discovered all the important metabolites, which is probably true. The glycolysis, TC cycle, all this central carbon metabolite is probably the most important metabolite. But there are probably also other metabolite, new metabolite coming from the gut microbiome, and those things should be discovered
Mm.
so that we can either treat, you know, target them, right? So that's what we do.
Do you think that we can greatly influence these metabolites?
Good question. I mean, to influence those metabolites, we have to figure out also enzymes. What enzyme makes this? What enzyme break down this metabolite? So that's another challenge to identify the enzymes. Is super hard.
Thank you to First Form for sponsoring this episode of the show. As always, guys, I only collaborate with companies that I use their products myself. And today I want to tell you about my pre-workout that I've been using, and that is Megawatt Natural. I don't just use Megawatt Natural before my workout, which it is phenomenal for that. It has natural caffeine, it has whole coffee fruit extract, it has B6, B12, choline, L-tyrosine, just a whole bunch of stuff. But I will tell you this, as a mom of 2 little children who runs a business, etc., I definitely need energy. I use Megawatt sometimes before my workout and sometimes midday around 1 o'clock to give me an extra boost of energy. You guys can use half a scoop. 1 whole scoop has 150 milligrams of caffeine. If that's too much for you, you can use half a scoop. This product is phenomenal. I love it. I don't get all jittery. I get focused and a great boost of energy. Firstform.com/Dr. Lyon. You can order there and you will get free US shipping on your order of $75 or more. That's firstform.com/Dr. Lyon. What I'm hearing you say is that we still have quite a bit of work to do
Yeah.
within the field. It's really fascinating. The last piece of what you're doing, which I find very fascinating, is that organ crosstalk. And again, think about it even in medicine. We look at the cardiovascular system. We have cardiologists, we have endocrinologists, etc., pulmonologists, which look at the lungs. And we do look at these systems in context of the whole body, but not really. It really is in isolation. That's why you get a referral. That's why you have multiple teams. And maybe that will always be that way, but we have very little knowledge of the interface of all of them together. So I'm so curious as to the work that you're doing to advance that and what you've discovered. Is there one aha moment, one crazy discovery?
Yeah. Organ crosstalk is another, for sure, it's a frontier of metabolism. And you know about this Cori cycle, right? It's really popular, most famous organ
Most famous.
Right, exactly. And so Cori cycle is about between 2 organs, liver and muscle, and glucose lactate exchange. And for sure, it cannot be just one cycle in the body. So our lab basically tried to find 100 or even 1,000 more cycles of this crosstalk between different organs. And we have some evidence that, of course, there are a lot more going on rather than just one this cycle. For sure, glucose lactate is most important, maybe in terms of metabolism. But we basically do not really understand at the whole body level crosstalk between organs. So we basically unbiased. We are just unbiased and comprehensive. We try to figure out everything. Hopefully, in the next 10 years.
Chop chop, right? Get to it. You guys got a lot of work. Do you think? And where are you starting? I know that liver primary is really of interest to you, and probably because of your original research in fructose metabolism. Do you think that muscle, just by being 40% body weight, may be significantly influential? If you were to kind of think about where are the from a metabolomic perspective, where is the disposal going? Or are you more interested in, say, adipose?
Right. We are nowadays more interested in kidneys because
Interesting.
yeah, it turns out kidney is really active metabolic organ. I mean, we thought always kidney is just another passive organ that takes up garbage from the blood and then it's released to the urine. That's true, but kidney also generate a lot of amino acid during fasting. Kidney is one of the organs that generates serine and glycine and other, urea cycle metabolite, and then provide them to the body. And also, if you think you mentioned muscles, right? Muscle use creatine, right? Phosphocreatine for energy. And if you think about it, creatine is made from the liver, but liver needs this glycosamine metabolite to generate creatine. And this glycosamine is only made by the kidney. So if you have a problem in kidney, you cannot make glycosamine, you cannot make creatine. The muscle would suffer because of the creatine deficiency. So kidney is so important. We found so many things coming out of the kidney, and also so many things are taken up by kidney, but not all goes to urine. So they basically use them to do something. And kidney is also very heterogeneous. If you think about the structure,
Right.
right, the cortex versus medulla is quite different, and that's actually headache because it's hard to dissect in mice, and once you dissect, it's too slow, and then all this metabolite changes. So that's why it's important to use other new technique like imaging mass spectrometry to identify metabolite and then measure flux in the live, the intact organ instead of dissecting them. Yeah.
That's fascinating. I quite frankly had never thought about the kidney in that way. I had never thought about the health of kidney related to the health of skeletal muscle, and certainly its metabolic metabolic demand,
Mm-hmm.
which is interesting. So I'm excited to hear and read and see some of your research. Thank you so much for your time. I don't know if there's anything that else that you would like to mention. Really, really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, really, really appreciate your input and questions. That reminds me of what's important, to study and yeah, I mean, this is really good conversation. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Me too. Thank you so much. We'll link to your lab site, to your Twitter. Again, I am so grateful, Dr. Jang, for your time. And the goal is to bring the experts that are in the trenches doing the research to the forefront so that we can learn directly from you. Again, thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a nice day.